This talk has a history. Last November, I was invited to speak in Bordeaux, France, at a meeting of young women and men mathematicians on the issue of gender equality in the profession of researchers and of enseignant-chercheur, a French academic title that combines teaching and research duties. Adeline, who was attending, contacted me a few months later to ask whether I would agree to present it here, and I would like to thank her for that. I'm deeply honored by this invitation and delighted to speak before you all. I would just like to thank the organizing committee and in particular Adeline and Katharina, who organized this session and brought together Odome and myself a few weeks ago to finalize it. I have indeed chosen to address professional equality in the academic world from a gender perspective. But we cannot forget the intersectional dimension of this issue, and I am all the more pleased to share this morning with Odome, whose remarks will broaden my perspective. Professional equality between women and men in academic research can be examined through multiple dimensions: activities, careers, remuneration, salaries and bonuses, for instance. I have chosen to approach this issue through the lens of scientific excellence, as Odome said, and its implication for professional success. Drawing on research by specialists in gender studies, historians, sociologists, economists, and political scientists. Their works, which belong to the field of critical feminist studies, are based on an analysis of the gendered realities of academic activity as experienced by women. Many of them have been conducted at the local level of scientific institutions operating within the higher education and research landscape of various countries, such as United States, Sweden, United Kingdom, France, Switzerland, etc. Far from being a limitation on the scope of their findings, this is precisely what makes them relevant and compelling, including, I think, to an international audience. But with one caveat once again, to which Odome drew our attention: the prevalence of Occidental and global North national realities. First of all, I would like to, in an introductory section, to examine in turn the issue of men-woman equality and then that of excellence. I am a historian of mathematics, and while I'm speaking here about the realities of the 21st century, it's a historical perspective that shaped my approach to these issues. This perspective stems from the work of Margaret Rossiter, an American science historian, on women scientists in the United States who began publishing in the 1970s. She studied the career patterns of over 500 female scientists, all PhD holders, prior to 1920. And that's a situation very specific to the United States, entirely different from the French one, for instance. At the same time in France, France counted barely 20 women with doctorates. Her study reveals not only a total absence of professional equality between women and men, but, above all, the form of systemic discrimination to which these women were confronted. Without going deeper in her study, I would like to highlight 2 points. It is by uncovering and analyzing an objective reality that Rositer is able to demonstrate this conclusion. Gender inequalities in careers result from the patriarchal system itself and not from what individual female scientists might be or do, from flaws or weaknesses in female scientists, or from what they supposedly have that is different, which most often means less than men. Hence, first, the question for me to ask regarding professional equality between women and men in science cannot primarily be about how to help women become scientists like the male ones, or to make up for any of these supposed flaws, shortcomings, or weaknesses. But rather, the issue is to consider both women and men in science and to examine the way science works with the masculine norms of success that govern it. And I shall develop this. Second, Margaret Rositer's conclusion is a research finding. As are the various results I am going to present in this talk, they are the fruit of scientific analysis. They are not opinions. I must emphasize, the social sciences have their own rigor, have their own scientific method, and research is not opinion, it is knowledge that has been forged. It is important to make this clear at a time when science, entire fields of science, are being called into question, and not only in the US. I will not go into detail about Rositer's finding, which I can return to in the discussion if you wish. For now, I will simply mention one of her best known results, which has reached far beyond specialist circle and is having a major impact today. That is the Matilda effect, which she formulated in a 1993 article in Social Studies of Science. Under this term, Rositer highlights an aspect of discrimination against women scientists, which plays a definite role in the issue of excellence. The Matilda effect states that women have been, and continue to be, victims of almost systematic injustice in the attribution of scientific credit, and in forms that are specifically tied to their sex. I now turn to excellence. Excellence is now the expected horizon, staged and performed by all institutions as well as by colleagues for the entire academic life and all scientific activity. It is now the norm for any career, whatever one's position. And this is why I believe it provides a good starting point for questioning gender equality in the workplace. But whilst excellence dominates the institutional landscape unchallenged, it is never really questioned or even defined. Most of the time, one measures excellence, one evaluates it, while being quite unable to define it. It is thus the measurement process itself that implicitly reveals what constitutes excellence for those who measure it. Hence, the importance of understanding what this system of scientific recognition actually seeks to evaluate, and of understanding the criteria on which the evaluation is based, whether a quantitative one or a qualitative one. For Even before discussing the measurement instrument for excellence, it is important to clarify what one seeks to measure. What precisely is the object of measurement? One answer seems obvious: the activity of scientists. But this is where everything hinges, or at least a great deal hinges. What is meant by activity in this context of evaluating excellence? What conception do we have of it? Is it output? Publication? Is it European Research Council grants or other fundings? Is it career progression? Or what is known as academic success? You will notice that in this list, which is the first that may come to mind based on our usage and experience, a number of dimensions of activity within, for instance, a mathematics department are missing. It is this conception of academic activities that I would like to discuss here, for it is what determines the criteria on which the recognition system is based and on which the quantitative or qualitative measurement of excellence is founded. I shall do so by taking into account both what is present in my list and what is absent from it, and by examining what this produces in terms of gender inequality. Thus, in the second part, I will discuss the existence of gender bias in the evaluation of various aspects of research output, including publication, and in career progression. And I will present classical statistical results. In the third part, I will give some findings from sociological studies on the reality of discrimination and male norm success. In a fourth part, I will present a critique of this very conception of the activity, as well as of the male norms underpinning it. Here, I will draw on two concepts from critical feminist studies on gender inequalities in the sociology of work and in gender studies. First one, the sexual division of labor. Second one, the academic housework. And finally, in the first part, I will return to the myth of meritocracy and the gender of excellence. In conclusion, as I did in Bordeaux for the young mathematicians at the request of the organizers who wanted me to present some positive points to avoid to despairing them, I shall venture to suggest a few avenues of inquiry so as not to end on an observation which, in itself, does not inspire optimism at all. Finally, a clarification. I have chosen here not to pile up quantitative data which demonstrate and highlight the biases that mar the evaluation of excellence and gender inequality. I will, however, return to this issue and the role of data in the conclusion. I have chosen instead to focus my presentation on a feminist critique of the concept of academic excellence, which I believe is less well known, less accessible, and which is fundamental. I would like to explain my use of feminist critique. This is neither a militant approach nor one in favor of women. It is a methodological scientific approach that seeks to take a step back in the analysis of a social phenomenon, and in our case, scientific excellence, by taking into account gendered realities experienced by women, realities which are most often overlooked in analysis, conceived in the gender-neutral terms, that is to say, by neglecting the gender variable. and thus in a male-neutral perspective by nature, I myself, sorry. Hence, the shift in the question, in the analysis, and hence the innovative results that better capture the phenomena studied in the complexity of their gendered reality. I will be moving through all these points far too quickly. For those of you who are interested, I have a corresponding bibliography covering all these points available. And I'm not sure. Well, sorry, here it is. Here's the link to get the bibliography. And it is based on an article I co-authored with a colleague to be published next June in a French language journal, which is named CILZEL, Sciences, Techniques, Société. But first and foremost, to get straight to the heart of the matter, I would like to address what is, from the outset, a fundamental and widespread challenge to gender equality, including when we talk about excellence, however we define it. I mean sexist and sexual violence. I can? It was through the study of a global approach to the gender gap in mathematical, computing, and natural science, how to measure it, how to reduce it, which was published in 2020, that I became aware of significance of these forms of violence in any discussion or research on gender equality in science. This study, based on a survey among more than 32,000 respondents, female and male scientists working in 159 countries, was conducted by 7 scientific unions in STEM fields and 4 international organizations. And I think I met no, I didn't. You haven't well, you can find it in the web. The first chapter is indeed dedicated to sexist and sexual harassment, the first one. The respondents were asked to answer 2 types of questions relating to, first, the scale of the phenomenon, second, the extent of its impact on women's career paths, taking into account doctoral studies, postdoctoral research, careers, professional life within their teams, etc. The results are striking. Firstly, more than 1 in 4 women say they have experienced sexual harassment during their studies or their career. You see that mathematics is about average, no better. Applied mathematics slightly below average, 1 in 5 women. A multifactorial analysis yields the following result, which illustrates the widespread questioning of gender equality in academia that I mentioned. In their responses, women are 14 times more likely than men to have personally experienced aggression. Furthermore, women report significantly more instances of having been subject of segregation during their studies or their thesis, and significantly fewer instances of having received signs of respect from their colleagues in their work. And finally, the survey highlights men's lack of awareness of these forms of discrimination. And we are fully in our subject. Excellence is supposed to reward a career path considered particularly successful. Yet, on this path, there is a massive inequality between male and female scientists, namely sexist and sexual violence against women. A study was carried out in France at one of the Parisian universities by sociologist Sophie Lenry on representations associated with women's career at university. She conducted 2 surveys based on interviews with female and male academic colleagues from various disciplines, focusing on their personal paths, their careers, and their perceptions of the place of women and men in academia. Seeking to uncover the gender mechanism underpinning the model of academic success, she identified and analyzed expression of skepticism regarding women's competence and/or legitimacy in the academic world. Although the general feeling among those interviewed, men and women, is that the university and the world of science are neutral spheres, where there are no inequalities, particularly of gender, with everyone advancing on the basis of merit. She identified in their discourse on female researchers, and one more time among both women and men, an implicit evocation of 3 figures of the female academic, all of which reflect a gendered, sexist view of women. That of the mother, female colleagues are expected to be nurturing. That of the spinster, who, having no children, is assumed to have no life outside work and is expected to be available without limit. And finally, the courtesan, who is said to attain certain positions solely through her power of seduction, owing her success to qualities other than the scientific merit of her work. When you hear that, if I dare, what is the model associated to all of you or to each of you? These models generate expectations from the professional environment, but that also function as an assignment to fit into predefined categories that are deviant and alien to expected academic behavior. These figures are not only sexist, but as they also establish women as outsiders within the institution, as others, a term used by 2 Dutch researchers, Van den Broek and Benschop. I now turn to gender bias in the evaluation of various aspects of academic output, including publication and career progression, looking in particular at mathematics, partly because of you and your academic field in the broadest sense, but also because there is particularly illuminating research in this area, published among others in the study A Global Approach to the Gender Gap I have already mentioned. Before going any further, I would like to clarify the meaning of the word gendered, which I have already used extensively. Gendered means 2 things. First, there is a difference between what is feminine and what is masculine. But 2, there is also a hierarchy of value between what is assigned to the feminine and what is assigned to the masculine. The masculine is attributed what is most highly valued. The feminine, what is valued least. And this, which is therefore distinct from sex, gender is different from sex, was formalized in France by a researcher, Daniel Kergoat, in the concept of gendered social relations and plays a fundamental role in the issues of professional equality. Let us now consider what is most effective in the evaluation of excellence, namely publication. Numerous quantitative studies, particularly from North America, United States, and Canada, have established that women published a third less than men. If we limit ourselves to publication if we limit ourselves to publication in so-called top-tier journals, this proportion is even lower, as studies across a number of disciplines and countries have shown. Thus, not only is the proportion of women lower in published articles, but it is also lower on editorial board, on the position of power or close to power within these journals, that is, less represented on editorial boards, referee pools, guest editors, etc. Finally, it can be added that it is combined with a lower citation rate for articles where women are the first authors. Let us illustrate that for mathematics. With the study of Mihaljevic and Santamaria on publication patterns published in the Global Approach. They first worked on the Centerbrat database, covering the period from 1970 to 2016. By analyzing the mathematical journals included in the database, which are listed with their ranking, they established that the percentage of women among authors depending on the journal's rank and deviates significantly from the average percentage across the entire database. Thus, there are fewer women, up to 20% fewer women among the authors in the top quarter of the highest ranked journals than one might have expected based on the distribution of women and men across the entire sample. Conversely, the proportion of women is higher than average in journals in the bottom quartile of the ranking. This inequality is more pronounced between female and male authors in the case of the most prestigious journals, if we can say. It is particularly interesting to analyze insofar as it appears to stem from the particular prestige accorded to this journal. In a second phase, Mihaljevic and Santamaria analyzed the responses of over 10,000 female and male scientists worldwide to a questionnaire concerning their perceptions of their own article submission practices. They arrived at a particularly valuable and interesting conclusion. One argument is often put forward to explain the inequalities in the publication of scientific articles written by women in top-tier journals. Women would practice a form of self-censorship, not daring to submit papers to such journals. Mihaljevic and Santamaria debunk what is in fact merely a stereotype. They demonstrate, drawing on a study in the field of both mathematics and physics, that while there is indeed a lower publication rate of articles by women in the so-called top-tier journal in this field, this is not necessarily due to fewer submissions from female scientists. Indeed, there is no evidence at all that a significantly lower number of submissions by women is responsible for the underrepresentation of the highest ranked journals. The authors thus rule out the factor of self-censorship. and point, again based on the response to their questionnaire, to systematic reason in the field of editorial field. As I have said, this is a very valuable finding. There are indeed very few studies of this kind, as researchers investing bias in editorial processes never have access to the submission process received by journals. Yet they are essential to refute the pernicious argument of self-censorship. Finally, what is the profile of the authors of these prestigious journals? Mihaljevic and Santamaria shows that the large number of submissions to prestigious journals appears to correlate more with high research output, a well-established network, and seniority in academic career, all factors that carry sex discrimination in the academic world. What is called into question then are the characteristics linked to the functioning of these prestigious journals, where editorial boards function as an exclusive, male-dominated circle. Let us now look at careers and the speed of career progression associated with excellence. It is well known that if you are good, or even if you are excellent, you progress quickly in your career. Let us begin with some data on the differences, I use this term for now, in careers between women and men. You have there a classical scissor-shaped graph showing the respective percentages of men and women at the various stages of a career considered to be typical. The data are taken from the document Chief Figures produced by the European Union covering its 27 member states. Let's look first at grade C, that is the first job after the PhD, that is postdoctoral position. We can see that the percentage of women and men are almost equal as they were at the previous stage of the PhD. We see a first drop-off in the position of women at the grade B level. Despite the diversity of statuses across Europe, this grade corresponds to the first at which the scientist is recruited other than on a temporary position related to projects. It corresponds to the recognition of autonomy and responsibility of the recruited scientists in their research and sometimes in their teaching, which is not the case for postdoctoral positions, that is grade C, linked to a specific research project. Yet, the attribution of these scientific qualities is deeply marked by sexist conception related to the segregated division of academic labor, as I shall show. In some countries, such as France and Spain, this grade B corresponds also to the first permanent position, or in Germany to indefinite contracts. Another dimension of professional equality then comes into play, precarity. Understood here are unstable, non-tenured employment conditions, which is characteristic of grade C, but less or not of grade B. The early stages of an academic career are in fact increasingly characterized by job insecurity, particularly as women are more likely to be recruited into part-time and fixed-term posts than be appointed to permanent posts. But there is a second, even more significant drop. There is indeed a marked increase in the underrepresentation of women between grade B and the highest grade in the career, grade A, that is to say, at the point of promotion to professor or equivalent. If we look at the last point that my co-author and myself added on this graph, that's the point with people who get prestigious prizes, international prestigious prizes. We see that the slope of both curves flattens out. We move from grade A to prestigious awards. We can see thus that the gap widens significantly at the transition from grade B to grade A, more than at the end of the curve. We can refine this analysis of the transition from rank B to rank A by calculating a male advantage index. This index is calculated as the ratio of the chances for men among all men academics to those for women among all female academics of receiving the same form of academic recognition. In this table, where we have calculated it for promotion from grade B to grade A using data from she figures from 21 European Union countries, the male advantage index for becoming a professor is, on average, equal to 2. This means that a man is twice as likely as a woman to progress from, let us say, associate professor to full professor. We thus move from observing differences, the word I used, to highlighting a significant male advantage that undermine gender equality in career progression and ultimately in the production of excellence. And this matters because differences are not necessarily understood as discrimination. And that is precisely where the problem lies in discussion with some colleagues. They acknowledge these differences and sometimes even take offense at them, but they refuse to accept the idea of systematic discrimination within academia, gendered or not gendered, but here, gendered discrimination. To get there, it was necessary to shift one's gaze to adopt a new perspective. The issue is not that of women scientists, their place, for example, or at a particular stage, effectively taking men as a control group. The men perspective, a benchmark that is never questioned. The ambition from a feminist perspective is to interrogate the system as a whole, and therefore all its actors, men and women alike, to examine separately and then compare the dynamic of women's career paths and those of men's, which is made possible by the male advantage index. Questioning the systems allows us to refuse one of the hypotheses put forward to explain the growing differences between women's and men's career. Are these differences not due to the effect of women's particular trajectories, what they are, what women are, or what women do as women? I would thus cite several findings from sociological studies, some of them being old, demonstrating the sexist dimension of the university system, explaining these differences and validating the reality of discrimination. Christine Veneras and Agnes Wold, in 1997, studying the postdoctoral grant allocation system in Sweden, showed how the gaps between the number of grants awarded to female and male applicants were a consequence of sexism and nepotism they have highlighted. They demonstrated that female applicants to the Sweden's leading biomedical research agency had to have a scientific output 2.5 times higher than that of their male colleagues in order to achieve the same competence score. However, women who were initially rated lower simply because of their gender were able to improve their competence score thanks to an affiliation bonus with one of the members of the committee. You have nepotism and sexism. Sophie Henry in the case of French University and Farinas Fessa in the case of Swiss University showed in the early 2010s what are the standards required to achieve a model, brilliant, excellent career as described by the scissors diagram. They highlighted 3 norms considered necessary: norms of authority, ambition, and availability. And we are back to the first talk and the first discussion. Qualities with which men are supposed naturally endowed, while women are expected to adapt to them in order to achieve excellence and succeed. 3 norms which are therefore masculine standards of success, and which I would now like to show you are nothing but illusions. I will begin with the result of a study on the prizes and awards, one dimension of excellence, the prizes and awards, granted by 13 US STEM disciplinary societies. There are 4 types of awards: scholarly, young investigator, service, and teaching. Their names neatly summarize the type of activities taken into account. We know that some of them, but not others, are considered in the conception of scientific excellence. It is clear that teaching and service activities are really, if ever, rarely, if ever, taken into account, however excellent one may in these tasks. Let's look at those who receive those various awards. For all types of awards, regardless of discipline, the percentage of female scientists is well below 50%. Even in teaching, where it is well known that women are far more present than men. But above all, the proportion of women is by far the highest in teaching and service prizes, while the proportion of women awarded prizes for their research is at least twice as small. I leave you to look the figure from mathematics is not very different. What does this tell us? A natural inclination among women towards certain tasks, or a natural aptitude for those tasks in which they would excel, as opposed to other tasks, such as research, where it would be men who will excel. This study and others have shown the effect of what is known as the sexual division of academic labor. That is, a form of social division of labor which has 2 organizing principles. The principle of separation, there are men's work and women's work. And the hierarchical principle, a man's work is worse than a woman's work. This gendered and patriarchal division of labor has implications for the gender of excellence. In the 1990s, several sociologists developed a concept that captures this enduring reality, that of academic house, I love this term, academic housework, which refers to various collective tasks linked to the smooth running of teaching, administration, and also research. The term academic housework was coined to highlight the parallels that can be drawn with the private domestic sphere. It is invisible and unpaid work, like domestic work in the private sphere, therefore, insofar as it is not recognized in careers, nor does it count towards excellence. This housework places even greater strain on the only time that is valued, that is that of research, and for women in particular, adds to the difficulties of the demand for maximum availability. Finally, this housework is nevertheless essential work upon which excellence necessarily relies. For scientific activity, including research itself, is never conducted in isolation and necessarily involves collectives. It has an inherently collective dimension. This is a reality denied by the meritocratic conception of excellence, which instead cultivates the myth of the individual trajectory of the great scholar, the great researcher, most often male, of course, who rises above the rest and achieves excellence through his own merit, his own genius, without stooping to academic housework. And this will be my final point. The idea that the academic world has been and remains capable of freeing itself from personal or social attributes of their protagonists, to use Merton's words, is still widely prevalent today among our colleagues and in position of power, despite the reality we have just seen with regard to gender. The idea, which is at the root of meritocracy, has a particular history in France that is worth to examine it in its national singularity. Since the French Revolution in the 18th century, in contrast to the Ancien Régime that preceded it, meritocracy has been the foundation of elite recruitment in France. It is no longer social status, wealth, or nobility that should grant access to the state's senior administrative and intellectual posts. It is individual merit. To this end, the revolution created an essential tool, competition, that is concours in French, a competitive examination where candidates are assessed first anonymously, with written test before sitting on an oral exam. Those ranked highest, therefore the best, enter the école, where they are trained for the role they will eventually perform after another examination that will once again select the best among them. For the scientific discipline, including mathematics, the revolution established two major schools, the École Polytechnique and the École Normale Supérieure. And even today, and you may know, in mathematics, the overwhelming majority of French associate professors or professors, including among the younger generation, are graduates of these two institutions. Let's see whether the meritocratic promises inscribed in the DNA of the French system are kept. Let's start with the neutrality in terms of personnel of social attributes. What would be the entrance concours? No. Well, let's start with the neutrality in terms of personnel or social attributes. What would the entrance concours for higher education guarantee. All the more so for the scientific subjects where mathematical tests have a decisive role. French sociological studies have recently focused on the bias at play during the admission exams for these two famous institutions. They demonstrate that, contrary to the widely held belief that success in the competitive exam is the accumulation of an individual journey, it is largely influenced by collective effects of several orders. First, the very format of the admission exam in this school favors students trained in a few of the most prestigious preparatory classes, private or public. The education they receive there molds them to succeed in this concours, which clearly refers to a collective dimension, regardless of the student's personal value. Second, this schooling implements gendered selection mechanism rooted in the practices of the teachers, which are reflected in the results of the written exams. A male candidate has twice as much chance as a female candidate of being admitted to the exams. Third, the competitive examinations favor social reproduction, as shown by the social attributes of the parents, fathers in particular. And fourth, moreover, the gender-related disadvantage is particularly strong when women come from working class backgrounds. She has all wrong. Now, let's look at another challenge to this meritocratic myth at work in academic careers, theorized under the name of hidden curricula. Despite the evident inequalities and biases that undermine the principle of meritocracy, the meritocratic discourse draws its strength in the idea that success in a career is primarily individual, that merit would be primarily individual. The implication is that it is not the meritocratic principle itself that is at fault, but the way in which it is applied. However, research has uncovered informal socialization processes in academic life that offer decisive advantages for career success. That process is called hidden curricula, and which has nothing to do with individual talent. The organization of academic life, the double penalty for women is the sexual division of academic work and the sexual division of family life, means that the process produces a systematic male advantage that is most often ignored. Male are advantaged in academic life. The normal functioning of the university, thus, in practice, relies on positive discrimination in favor of this dominant male group, calling into question an assumed meritocracy. Finally, last point, which I will not develop here, but which is crucial, far from backing down from the evidence of discrimination, the meritocratic discourse has been strengthened by recent developments in the university. The implementation of the new public management and the creation of the researcher as entrepreneur, emphasizing the focus on the individual and their supposed skills and individual merits. So, any positive elements? Clearly, nothing positive can be found in what the statistics reveal about the current state of gender inequalities, and especially in mathematics. I do not have specific data for your field cryptography, but for French universities, in France, the share of female researchers in mathematics has not progressed over 20 years. If the current trend continues, there will be no more women grade A in pure mathematics by 2060. And as for applied mathematics, parity for grade A will be achieved in, you have no hope, 2270. The positive, in my view, is to be found in the growing awareness of these gender-based inequalities by the actors and actresses. For me, indeed, the positive is in having some avenues to avoid suffering, in being able to intervene in a way that we consider as good, not remaining stuck at the level of observation alone. My first avenue is count, seek, obtain, make known data on these inequalities, on this discrimination. Count to make the problem exist, keep it current, reformulate it, otherwise solve it. Count to make speakable all that remains to be conquered. Use gender lenses, that is, fix the system, not the women, to find where the system is stuck. Point out the norms of scientific activity considered normal, that challenge the equality men-women. And it is up to you to formulate and create feminine neutral norms. And that is important for the second avenue with which I will end. Act to make women scientists succeed, yes. There is a lot of mentorship initiative for this, institutional ones, associative ones, but we are facing a major challenge in terms of equality. Make women succeed, okay, but at what cost? By turning them into successful male scientists, just like any other? By trying to adapt them to masculine norms of success, which I hope to have shown only work by relying on a deeply unequal functioning of the academic world and our professions. Yes, make women scientists successful, of course, but we must not fall into the dangers of an elitist equality. We must have the goal of success for each woman and the emancipation of all women and men. Thinking to mentorship, for instance, we can also make mentorship having collective moments, focus of the critic, feminist critic of masculine norms, focus on invention of gender-neutral norms, the development of alternative tools in the life of labs, of seminars, of departments, of evaluation. The goal being to hold together individual mentoring and the collective dimension of feminist critique and collective elaboration. I thank you for your attention.